Welcome to Triptych.
Three friends having a chat
About three artistic masterpieces.
Making connections for modern life.
I can't quite believe it, but we have made it to episode 8. So it's the final one of season 1. Can you believe it, Sophie and Joel?
Woo! No, can't believe it. Although in other ways, yes, I can.
Yes, it's that mixed feeling. It's felt like it's felt long, but also not long at the same time. I mean,
That's what we hope for all our episodes, isn't it?
right, exactly. This is long, but not long. Yeah, there we go.
So we thought we'd discuss our childhood passions. Why don't we start with you, Sophie? What did you fall in love with artistically, and how old were you, in fact?
Okay, so you're probably going to laugh at me for being pretentious, okay?
We would never do that.
I was growing up in rural Wales. I was not a cool kid at all, and around the age of 10 or 11 massively fell in love with the poetry of Lord Byron. I have a vivid memory of being on the route to swimming lessons with the school. Everyone was on the school bus. Most of my peers were playing like Dares and Kiss Chase in the back of the bus.
Mm-hmm.
And I was sat at the front with a small leather-bound book of Lord Byron's poetry reading She Walked in Beauty.
And
Wow.
did anybody notice?
I don't think they did. But yeah, I was an odd kid. So I found a lot of refuge in my poetry. So I was not cool. So there you go.
So, well, my one is the complete opposite end of that particular spectrum. I think I must have been 5 or 6 when I discovered the true joy that is Mr. Ben. Now, those of a certain age will remember him. So he was on TV, BBC, at that weird point just before having your afternoon nap. So I think he was on at about 10 to 2 in the afternoon. And it's a sort of 5-minute show. And Mr. Ben lived on this sort of average suburban street, and he would go, for some reason on his street there was a fancy dress shop, which obviously you find on every British street, but he would go in and every day he'd want to try on a different fancy dress costume. He'd go into the changing room, and whatever the costume was, he would walk out of the changing room into that world. So if he wore a kind of Wild West thing, then he'd suddenly be in the Wild West, or a medieval knight, then he'd be at a joust, or whatever it is. And I discovered much later that there are only about 12 or 13 episodes made. But for a little boy like me, it was endless. And there were just constant opportunities and possibilities. I just loved it. And I think I stand by that.
Well, I don't know where I fall on the Byron Ben spectrum. I could be on either end or somewhere in the middle, but I used to draw a lot as a kid. And particularly, I loved drawing pictures of horses. So I remember I'd have books with horses and just, it took a long time before they were anywhere near anatomically correct,
Mm-hmm.
I was drawing through to my mid-teens, and then
Wow.
I haven't drawn much since, but I'd love to get back into it.
Yeah, do it.
We talked about Barbie in a previous episode. Have you now seen that yet, Joel?
No, I haven't, but
No.
I promise I will see it before we do season 2.
Well, I think you should, because I think you'll find some resonance in that movie with your obsession with drawing horses. But I'll leave that for another day.
Okay. I'll discover that on my own, and then I'll tell you.
Something to
Please.
look forward to. Excellent.
Yes.
Right, well, on with the show.
My masterpiece for this final episode is The Yellow Wallpaper by Charlotte Perkins Gilman. This is a short story. It's only about 21 pages, and it was written in 1890, and it's somewhat of a feminist classic, and it's kind of gothic horror. And at a basic level, it's about a woman's descent into madness. But really what it is a devastating critique on mental health and postnatal practices and the treatment of women in the 19th century. And we could say has much changed, and we'll discuss that later, I'm sure. And it is based on the author's own experience. In the story, there's a nameless woman who is suffering with a nervous disposition, or as it was called in those days, a slight hysterical tendency. And it's all from her perspective. We're reading it through these kind of diary entries. And she has this slight hysterical tendency, and her physician husband has prescribed her a rest cure in this rented house for the summer. And we soon discover it's probably just postnatal depression. She's had a baby and she can't cope. But the cure that her husband has prescribed is to rest and to not be allowed to write or to read or to really think or to do much other than just rest, largely in this hideous room with very trippy, hallucinogenic yellow wallpaper, which she gets obsessed with. We see that she is quite infantilized by her husband. She's coddled, she's gaslit by him and disbelieved. And she's fearing that this rest cure is actually making her worse. She's like, can't I just, do some reading, visit some people? And he's just like, there. He calls her little girl, pats her on the arm, that kind of thing. And we see through her diaries, which she's not supposed to be writing. So these diary entries are often cut short because she can hear her husband or her sister-in-law on the stairs and she's like, has to go and hide the diary. We see that she's not the most reliable narrator, but there's a huge use of dramatic irony. So we, the audience, are seeing past what she says to perhaps more of the real truth. And she has these tentative thoughts, which she only dares express to the diary, that it's perhaps her husband that is causing her not to get better quicker. But it gets really creepy when we get to her descriptions of the room and the yellow wallpaper. And we see that she has these naive assumptions that this room was formerly a nursery. She describes there being bars on the window to protect children falling out, she thinks. The bed is nailed to the floor. There's torn chunks of this wallpaper, and the floor is described as scratched, gouged, and splintered, and there's some bite marks on the bedstead. So it's at this point our sense as an audience is like, that doesn't sound much like a nursery. Who else has gone mad here? And we start wondering, is her husband and her sister-in-law, are they acting more as jailers at this point? And she notes these smudge marks that are going right around the room on the wallpaper. And basically she becomes convinced a woman's trapped behind there and needs freeing. And the story ends with the husband breaking down the door and to find his wife crawling round and round the room, saying that she's being freed from the wallpaper, and the husband faints. And we realise that the smudge marks are actually her shoulder. She's been crawling round and round the edge of the room. So it's quite deeply unsettling. But I think the important context is to know that Charlotte Perkins Gilman herself had a breakdown in 1887 after the birth of her first child. And she consulted Dr. Silas Weir Mitchell, who is mentioned by name in the book as a physician she's afraid of being sent to. And he prescribed to Charlotte Perkins Gilman this rest cure. And it's one that he pioneered. And he basically took all agency from her. She was forbidden to leave her bed, to read, to sew, to write, to talk, or even feed herself. And he told her that you must live a domestic life as possible, have your child with you at all times, and never touch a pen, brush, or pencil as long as you live. Thankfully, after a month of this, she actually ignored his advice, started writing, and recovered. And she wrote the yellow wallpaper, and actually she was so angry she sent the published story to this doctor saying never to inflict such awful practices on a woman again. So it's a really interesting look at mental health and pain in females. And so I was just, wondering what you thought of that. Joel, I'll come to you first.
Well, Sophie, it was a brilliant piece of writing. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't think I've ever read anything that was so delightful yet so disturbing.
Yeah.
I mean, the descriptions are so vivid. Just such imaginative writing. And I think it's not surprising that she went through an experience because she inhabits the character so well. As you say, it's written from her perspective. You're kind of being drawn in, but then you're like, whoa, wait, hold on, what's going on? As it progresses, you start to realize, wait, something's really wrong here. And you start to see through her perspective and just kind of, you're trying to understand what's really happening in terms of what she's saying. What's weird is that I think you kind of have to step away to feel compassion for her. You feel it by the very end when the story can't at all hide what's actually going on. But the
Yeah.
whole way through, you're kind of going with her, you're tracking with her, and you're like, oh dear. You highlighted just a relationship with the husband, which was just so scary. Scary in the way that good horror is scary, because there seems to be nothing untoward.
Right.
He's speaking to her tenderly, but he's not listening to her at all. He knows what's best for her. He's away increasingly for increasingly long periods of time, and it's just like an alarm bell. This woman is isolated. It was an engrossing piece of writing, and as you say, really disturbing and really thought-provoking, just in terms of just looking back at mental health, and then even thinking through mental health now. Have things changed that much? It feels like we're still kind of guessing and spelling when it comes to how we approach challenges of mental health, and they're very established ideas, which and then just that tendency that I think she catches so well. Why would you listen to somebody if they're going through a mental health crisis?
And that you see how it's this kind of vicious circle of her not being listened to. And, you see that she does have genuine mental health issues happening, but because she's in this situation of complete isolation and not being listened to and infantilization, you see how it just escalates and escalates to this point of madness. How about you, Mark?
I was astonished by it. Yeah, I never heard of her or the story. What blew me away was that this is 19th century. It could so easily have been 20th, even late 20th century. So it's a brilliant articulation of gaslighting, even though what the movie that we get the word from was like the 30s or something. It had sort of overtones of Daphne du Maurier's Rebecca. And so I was thinking maybe this was a place where the husband's previous wife had been. That's where I was going, but I don't think that's necessarily the thing. Because by the end, I was thinking, oh, this is some kind of asylum place that he's obviously bought or paid for a couple of months for his wife to be stored in, as it were. The narrative, the telling of it, it was like it had the tone of M.R. James' ghost stories, which are just a little bit later, but everything's so mundane and recognizably normal. And the writing is so canny because she doesn't. So what she's hallucinating or thinking she's seeing and stuff, that is well odd. But it's so mundane and everyday. And she's trying to see the best in him, but we read that and know she's having to convince herself because she doesn't believe it. And so we don't believe it. So to have this multiple layers to what she's writing so that we get it.
And I think it's the normalcy of the descent into madness is in that she seems, even till the very end when she is mad and we recognize that, you still see her rationalizing her behavior to herself.
Yes.
And she comes across as totally normal.
Yes.
She's writing about how she's so angry she really would like to just jump out of the window, but that might be misconstrued.
Right.
And it's really kind of funny because she doesn't want to misconstrue and do anything that looks like she's mad, but she's actively considered jumping out of a window. There's all these little hints that she's really, really losing touch with reality, but it's completely normal.
I felt like the pacing of the story was brilliant too, because the descent into madness happens so quickly over the last few pages, where you feel like, oh, there was a tipping point here, but we almost didn't realize when it happened. And then here she goes, and in the end, she's lamenting the fact that he's fainted because she now has to crawl over him as she circles the room, and you're like, oh, wow. One thing I found interesting, it felt like, you talk about gaslighting, but it felt like he really did think he was doing the right thing and just wasn't paying attention to her at all. Hence his reaction at the end when he realizes that, but she's gone. It's this sense of, it's a sense of shock for him to finally see her mental state clearly. It's clear he was neglecting her and just had kind of decided this was the way to do it. And any opposition she has to this, oh, we don't talk about that. That's not going to help you.
Is that too generous to him? I mean, in a way, that's...
I'm wondering. I float it for that reason.
Yeah, I kind of would like that to be true. And there's part of her that would like it to be true, but maybe it's darker than that. Because right from the very beginning, she says, Else, because it's pretty grotty, this room, she says, Else, why should it be let so cheaply? And it's like, She knows there's something amiss
Yeah.
about this place. She can't put her finger on it. And that makes me think, no, this is all a ploy, the whole place, and the fact that it's more like a prison cell. But one of the things that
Right.
really struck me about the writing is the second and third column in the edition you sent, Sophie. She has
Yeah.
this little phrase, "What is one to do?" And I underlined it.
Right.
She says it
Yeah, yeah.
3 times on the first page, effectively. And then it doesn't recur. But that is the issue. It's her agency of being able to do something.
Yes.
And
She
she
has
can't.
no agency.
She can't do anything.
Yeah.
So she's trying to think of something to do, but in the end, it's futile. And that just, to me, felt utterly devastating. And I guess that's the horror of abuse, isn't it? It removes agency apart from anything else.
And I think it's an interesting point that in terms of women and women's health in general and women's mental health and pain, we're still seeing issues of women's pain not being believed by doctors, and the fact that so many things are directed towards the diagnostic criteria is for men. I mean, honestly, it was up until 1993, women were rarely included in clinical trials for drugs.
Right.
I mean, that's so recent,
Wow.
So we see again and again how women are left out of the equation when it comes to believing their pain and understanding how it presents in women.
And you know the origins of the word hysteria, don't you? So the Greek word hysteron means a womb, and hysteria comes from the fact that you have a womb. So men don't have hysteria because we don't have wombs, and all kinds of things flow out from that weird little sort of semantic nugget.
Yeah, I've read some articles just on not just mental health, but the healthcare industry in general, and just how you kind of run by men. As you say, the studies are done on men, and how long it's taken us to even begin to think about what it looks like to care for women well.
I would like to make a final point. It's very interesting. I don't know if either of you have
Sophie,
read
no,
the
sorry,
book.
we've run out of time. No.
Well, that was a wonderful episode.
What can one do?
Rubbish. What can one do? Exactly. This is why I'm going to exert my agency. Have you read the book by Amy Bird, the Christian evangelical writer, Recovering from Biblical Manhood and Womanhood? She uses the yellow wallpaper story as her primary metaphor
That's
for
interesting.
the treatment of women in evangelical spaces and our infantilization.
Of course she does. I completely forgotten that. Wow. Yes. Is that how you heard about it?
No, I'd already read it because I'm a true feminist, Mark.
I wasn't suggesting.
I'd read it years
anything.
beforehand.
While you were doing Lord Byron, who was obviously a great feminist as well. But anyway, that's another story.
Yeah, which I thought, again, interesting to note how women are still finding the resonance in this book.
The masterpiece I'm going to end this season with is I'm a Rock by Paul Simon, written by Paul Simon, performed by Simon and Garfunkel. 1966. So I think we're moving forward a little bit, huh, Sophie? Just
a
tad.
little bit.
From the album Sounds of Silence, which was, I think, their first big hit album. Folk duo, of course, who didn't consider themselves pop stars at this time. So I'm a Rock was the last song on the second side of this record. It explores the character that Paul Simon is writing is just almost trying to justify his sense of isolation. It's a wonderfully written song in terms of its vividness and its images and the turns of phrase. You know, he starts in winter, and so it's almost like the external environment matches what's going on in his own heart and soul. And it's a verse refrain song. So the refrain is I'm a rock, I'm an island.
I am a rock, I am an island.
No, what's interesting is that you're listening to it, and for me, it really does sound like he's trying to convince himself that this is the case. He's making an argument to himself that he doesn't need anyone. As the song progresses, he says in verse 2, I've built walls, a fortress steep and mighty, that none may penetrate. I have no need of friendship. Friendship causes pain. It's laughter and it's loving I disdain. And so you're getting a sense of a backstory of somebody who has experienced some hurt in relationships and has now decided to protect himself and keep himself from that happening in the future. And that sense of I want to avoid pain, he really underlines it at the end, as if it was missable, but he wants to make sure you get where he's coming from. He says, and a rock feels no pain, and an island never cries. I found an interview with Paul Simon from 66, a journalist by the name of Ann Moss. And it's just interesting to hear him reflect on the song. He talks about the fact that he actually was writing about a year in his life where he did not have many friends or any friends. And he was actually intentionally isolating himself. He says of that year, it wasn't a bad year. It was lonely, but it was nice. And at the end of the year, I said, well, enough. Now I've got to go out and grab somebody and hug somebody, because you can't be an island and a rock all your life. And he says this about the song. Everything in the song means the complete opposite. You just can't be a rock and an island. You just must go out. I spent that year as I did because I had to become a person before I could go out. Afterwards, I felt much more at peace. It was like a religious experience. I just came out and I was calm and I wasn't afraid. And I didn't worry about, will people like me or won't they? I was just me. So it's fascinating to hear him reflect on that, just picking up that sense, just articulating clearly that sense that, look, yeah, this is not the truth. I was exploring this, I was experiencing this, I was writing this, but this is not how somebody can live. But you feel that heart on the heart on his sleeve sense of the song, where he's not just saying where I am, he's also explaining why I'm there and what I'm afraid of and what I'm trying to protect myself from. I've found it just over years to be a fascinating piece of art and just an interesting use of art to say something that you're not really saying. Yeah, I think for many people it's relatable, just that sense of feeling, I feel unsafe in relationships. So I want to be a rock. I want to be an island. I want to have the things that protect me and the walls I've built. And I want to convince myself that this story is true. What did you guys make of it?
You're definitely right that he's kind of protesting too much. I definitely also resonated with it, particularly looking back to my teenage years. After I'd got over, finding Mr. Ben fun, it was difficult to find replacements. And so I naturally turned to a song like this. But there was
none of your friends did fancy dress costumes.
That it only goes so far, I found anyway. But what I didn't know that sort of backstory of the kind of isolated year. That's really interesting, because that, correct me if I'm wrong, Joel, but that sounds like it was something he embraced and chose, perhaps almost as an artistic decision, and then recognizing that doesn't work or that's not the way to be. But it's almost a bit like a monastic calling, whereas the song always, to me, sounded like somebody who's absolutely stuck. And so putting a brave face on it and actually, put defense shields up. I guess maybe it's a bit like the whole incel subculture that's sort of arisen online and stuff. It's people who, for whatever agonies and pains, have this armor. And it's very tragic and poignant. And you don't know whether there's going to be any resolution.
What about you, Sophie?
Okay, so this is the point where I need to tell you both that I am a huge Simon and Garfunkel fan.
Are you really?
Yeah.
So
and
Lord Byron and Simon and Garfunkel?
No, but I was obsessed. When I moved past Lord Byron, when I was a teenager, I had my parents' old vinyl records and I was obsessed with Simon and Garfunkel. I used to get teased about it in school because all my friends were listening to Boyzone and Ricky Martin. So I love this song. I love the album The Sounds of Silence. And when my friends were at break time going off to chat, I used to take myself to the internet room, because that was what it was in those days, the internet room, and go on GeoCities websites and look up facts about Simon and Garfunkel.
Wow.
So
Okay,
if
so
there
you
was
were
any-
not kidding about
No, I was
being
not
obsessed.
kidding. Yeah,
I mean,
I was not.
in those days, it took so long for the facts to load.
I know. I mean, I think if there was any doubt about some potential neurodivergence going on in me, I think that pretty much answers that question. So I remember Paul being quoted about this song as well in an article, which I was looking for, but I couldn't find it. And he laughed about this song later on, saying, "Oh man, I must have been going through a particularly nihilist phase." I resonated with it so much. I don't think,
You had your poetry to protect you.
I had my books and my poetry to protect me because I couldn't make friends in the same way that other people did. I mean, I had my friends, but something, I don't know, I found that the words in the books and the poetry and the lyrics kind of nourished me and said something to me far more than my peers did. And so I have no need of friendship. Friendship causes pain, it's laughter, and it's loving. I disdain. I mean, you look at that and go, Paul, who hurt you?
Right.
But then I'm like, no, that's how I felt. I looked at other people having these easier relationships, and I was like, yeah, no, that was how I protected myself. I used to despise people in relationships. I used to say to my friends, quote, that I thought love was an avoidable weakness. So that was, that was me in teenage years. So I touch no one and no one touches me. I'm a rock. I'm an island. So this song was particularly special to me. I listened to it endlessly and completely resonated with every lyric. And until I realized myself, much like Paul Simon, that you can't be an island. I mean, it's like, John Donne's poem, "No Man is an Island."
Right.
And I recognized that you cannot be an island.
And I'm sure that's kind of in the ether as he's writing this.
Right, of course. It's got to be.
It's a sort of rejection of that, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because I remember for years, when I was younger, I mean, I remember listening to this. I think my parents had the record and we put it on. When he's saying, "I'm a rock, I'm an island," there's an ambiguity to that. And it sounds positive in the sense that, like God is a rock. He's dependable. He's reliable. You can, it's the opposite of walking on quicksand. And so there's something really admirable about that. So by itself, "I'm a rock," there's something vaguely attractive. But when he fills in the lines, if you like, it's devastating.
Yeah, because it's quite the projection. It's sung with such confidence. We've got the jangly 60s guitar going on behind it. It's sang kind of, in a triumphant way. It's just like, yeah, you can't touch me, man.
And the resonant bass notes, I love.
Yes. I'm like, I'm invincible. You can't touch me. I've got what I need. So it's this like massive projection, but actually you see it's because of intense hurt and loneliness that it's just being said to put up these protectors.
And from a song and from a production and a writing standpoint, how he ends, I think, just exposing that vulnerability right there helps even if you're resonating with it in a certain way. And again, I think that's a part of the pull of the song. A lot of people have felt this way. You get to the end and you start to realize, oh, wait a minute. This is all a defense. Even from a production standpoint, the way they'll strip out the electric guitars and everything, which was actually the producer apparently redid the song from an acoustic version and added all of that without Simon and Garfunkel knowing.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, but even from the production standpoint, it opens up those lines and they hit you in a different way when he's just singing that with just the guitar and you're like, oh, wow. All right, so even if I'm trying to do this, I guess I know why I'm trying to do this. And it's almost like there's now a chink in the armor in a certain sense.
So that chink in the armor, is that grounds for some degree of light and hope here? Or is it actually the despair of it? So, well, yes, he does weep and feel pain. He can't deny that. But it's like, and that's that. So you can try to be immune, but you won't be. I can't quite sort of place the emotion of that.
Yeah, I think it depends on how you're interpreting the art and relating to it. Kind of like what we were saying last time with Walcott's poem. You can read it in a way that this becomes the door unlocking for you to realize I can't stay here and come out. Or you can read it in a way like where it's like, well, I'm going to do this even though it's futile and I know what I'm doing. So I think it depends on how you come at it.
I think that's good. That's very good. Those who've been regular may remember that a few weeks ago we shared our artistic sharing failures, and my one at the time was the film Local Hero, which I tried to convince some of the students at Sheffield University that they might like, and that was a total failure. And because I'm a complete mug, I've decided that I'm going to bring that to this table. And I don't actually know what Sophie and Joel actually make of it. So my heart is in my sleeve or my mouth or my hands. I don't know. Anyway, I'm very nervous about this. But just a bit about the film. 1983, it was written and directed by Bill Forsyth, who was a Scottish film director who hit the big time with Gregory's Girl. And this was his second film, the sort of difficult second movie. And this was an extraordinary achievement. He managed to get Burt Lancaster to play a key role in it and pretty much broke the budget for the film just with that signing. The idea is that it's set in a remote village, fishing village in the Western Highlands of Scotland. And there's a big Texas oil firm that wants to basically buy the village and build a whacking great oil refinery there. And of course, that would completely destroy the environment of the area. It would completely change the character of the place. But, you know, big capitalism comes in, and the owner of the company, who's played by Burt Lancaster, sends a guy from the Houston office to go and negotiate with the village to buy it, basically. Sends a bloke called Mac because he thinks he's Scottish because he's called Mac, because actually his family were Hungarian immigrants and that sounded American to them, a Mac name. Anyway, so he's completely out of his depth, sort of fish out of water type scenario. He goes over and he becomes kind of just blown away by this community. Obviously, can't quite get his head around it to begin with, but he kind of goes native. And so is increasingly feeling uneasy about his mission. He has to make phone calls to Houston every few days. And there's only one phone box, the old style BT phone box. Apparently the village where they filmed it, there actually wasn't a phone box there. They had to put one in for the movie. And then British Telecom took it away at the end of the movie. So that was very sad. Basically, all the different people in this small village, I mean, it's a very close-knit community with all kinds of sort of weird and rather wonderful characters in it. And there's just a wonderful twist at the end. It's a light comedy. It's quite a light movie, quirky, small-scale comedy, but I absolutely love it. And I've lost count of the number of times I've seen it. And it's a kind of sort of modern fairy tale in a way. And of course it's make-believe, but then this is the movies. And the world doesn't work like this as things roll in the movie, but you kind of wish that it did. So there's nostalgia there. Some people think it's a caricature of Scotland, and there's a bit of that. I discovered that actually this was Vice President Al Gore's favorite movie. So you can't say fairer than that.
Wow.
Now, I don't know whether that
That's an
shocks
inconvenient truth, Mark.
Oh, very good, very good. I see what you did there. So basically,
You see what I did?
you have a choice of skeptic or superfan. There's no middle ground on this one. So, Sophie, skeptic, superfan?
Oh, I don't know if I fit into either of those.
No.
I did love it. Okay, well,
You're being forced here. Your agency is being taken from you here.
isn't it? Isn't this a terrible indictment? So I did love it. I thought it was just gentle and sweet and heartwarming and also incredibly funny. So it's definitely, me and my husband watched it and we were like, definitely could see myself watching this again and again. There was something so deeply comforting about it. Also, my grandmother ran a hotel in the 80s and 90s, and there was so much about the aesthetics of it that
Tartan wallpaper.
just made me... Yeah, exactly. And literally, even down to the kind of the Visa debit card sticker in like the window. You know,
The
those
same
kind of
music in the
things that
restaurant?
we did- No, and like the tablecloths and the way the dining room's arranged. I'm like, yes, this is exactly like my grandma's hotel. So that had a really pleasing, nostalgic thing to it. It had a lot of the kind of Gen X culture in the beginning, which I thought was interesting, you know, because
in
he's
Houston.
that kind of yuppie
Mm.
in Houston, because
Right.
he's like this yuppie guy with the kind of all the capitalist trappings and the ridiculousness of being in these big offices with people and talking to somebody on the phone while they're looking at them through
And
the big
the
glass
classic
partition.
thing, when he arrives, he wants to charge his briefcase. And they look at him like
Oh,
he's
yeah.
from a different...
Yes, exactly. So all these funny things and the fact, just these funny little kind of quirky things. And I thought it did quite a good job of that quirky British thing. I have to say, though, it definitely doesn't pass the Bechdel test.
Oh, well, that's true.
If you're familiar with that, which is a kind of a feminist test where you have to have two women in the film who have a conversation with each other about something other than a man. And the two women in it barely speak at all, and they are there just for the kind of goal and betterment of the men. They're like their, prizes for good behavior. So that kind of irritated me.
This is 1983.
I know, but still, I'm like, come on.
It didn't age well, Mark.
Yeah, I'm just like, oh man, these women. I thought it was interesting that it didn't follow what I might have expected. That the locals, they didn't protest this. They actually wanted the money.
Right.
So that was the interesting point. I can see Joel gesticulating.
So,
Jump
thank
in,
you,
my
Sophie.
friend.
Thank you so much for saying that. All right, so Mark, I need to start in the darkest place we can start. I completely get why those students from Sheffield United did not like this film. I mean, I think you have to be prepared for this film, and I was not prepared for it. I wasn't sure what to expect. I expected
Were you expecting
more
Black
of a
Mirror
storyline,
again?
for example.
You're expecting
No,
a story.
I wasn't. Yeah, I expected story. And then
There
I'm
is no
watching
story.
it and I'm like, no, there is a unifying theme. There is a storyline happening, but there are all of these sketches. There are all of these comedic sketches that aren't advancing the storyline.
Yep.
You know what? It reminded me of trying to watch Monty Python for the first time years after it was made. And I'm like, okay, this has been lauded as comedic genius. This is just annoying me. What is going on? So I found, though, as I watched it, when I finally oriented to what this was, I was like, okay, all right, that biker is funny. That biker is just
Yeah.
the fact that there are no vehicles in this town. And every time they step out, this guy is blowing by on this bike, almost hitting them down. I'm like, there's no traffic in this town. What is going on? So I think I got the absurdist wavelength eventually. It was interesting just kind of watching just the progression of some of the characters. So you kind of watching Mac, as you say, just fall in love with this place. There was a wonderful scene where he's collecting shells and he puts
Yes.
his watch down and just leaves the watch and doesn't seem to miss it at all. And you're like, okay, yeah, it's happening now. He's longing for this life. But Sophie, what you say, this is where I was just like, what is he doing? What's the writer doing? Because the locals don't value this place either. They're just like, oh, we're going to be millionaires. We can just move somewhere else.
Take the cash and run.
Right. I was expecting the locals to be like, no,
Of
this is our
course.
home. Our families have been
But
here.
when they're having their meeting in the church, they're trying to get the best price.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah. So, I mean, I almost felt like he was thinking about capitalism and the effect it has on us. While also, in some ways, it did feel like a love letter to rural Scotland and to this beautiful place that nobody really appreciates. I mean, they're bombing over the hill, kind of thing. Just like the jets are flying by and the preacher's like, yeah, well, if they're bombing here, then they're not bombing somewhere else, kind of thing. So, yeah, the absurdism took a while to get used to and kind of get on the wavelength and realize, okay, underneath this, he's exploring some themes and what's really valuable. Matt gets to the point where he's just ready to give up his whole life and just be here. While Gordon is like, okay, I'll take that deal, kind of thing. You're like, what?
I have one pressing question, though.
Oh, yeah.
Who is the local hero?
So
I don't know.
We are resonating here because I was like,
I'm like,
I got to the
I
end of the
don't
movie
know.
and I'm like, but it was called Local Hero. Like,
Yes.
Yes.
I'm like,
Who's
I have
that?
no idea. Who was the local hero? I don't know. Who
Well,
was it,
to
Mark?
begin with, we're meant to think it's Mac because everybody in the village think he's going to make us rich.
okay.
And I think there's a serious point that this touches on, and I think it's a reality across Britain. I don't know whether you say the same about Jamaica, but I suspect it's similar, that basically rural life is dying and people have no hope for its future. They want to get away. But in many parts of Britain and elsewhere, if you're in the country, you're stuck there because basically property in the cities is just way beyond anybody. And if you do have property, let alone if you're renting in the country, but if you own a bit of property, you're not going to be able to sell that for anything. So you're stuck there. And I think that's what this touches on, that even though this is the most picture postcard idyllic place you can imagine, and I know that part of Scotland reasonably well, and it's breathtaking, but it's a whole different ballgame to live there. And I think that's the serious thing that this is touching on. They're all wanting to get out. But in the end, because I think, and this is probably the reason Al Gore loves it, is that it is about the heritage, the natural world that we have, that we are responsible for looking after it for future generations. And so I think the local hero is the Fulton Mackay character, the Knox guy who lives on the beach, because he is the one who makes the connection in Happer's mind. I mean, I just love the Burt Lancaster character, and his, sociopathic therapist is just so funny. And that's a whole backstory that is just sheer genius. And it was Burt Lancaster's final film before he died, and it's just a masterpiece of acting. But he comes and makes his connection with old Knox, because Knox is the name of the oil company. So, I mean, makes that kind of sort of link somehow. And I think we're meant to think, and I may be wrong, but that old Knox, whatever his name is on the beach, is the one who saves the place. Because A, he's not going to sell for anything. So no money will ever convince him. It's too precious for that. And he's the one who convinces Happer to turn it into a sort of natural conservancy research station or whatever. I think we come away thinking, yes, actually, in the longer term, that is the heroic thing, even though in the short term, you might make buckets of cash.
Well, thank you for that interpretation, because I did think about Knox towards the end, but I thought it was so strange that his character played such a bit part for so long.
Right.
But then you realize, okay, he's sort of embedded in the place in a way that even other people are not.
That's right. He is the embodiment of that place and the heritage and the generations who've looked after that beach and the fishing and the town. It's not grown in size, but it's just there. I mean, he plays that little game with Mac, doesn't he, about, the grains of sand in his hand. And of course, Mac has no idea, so vastly overestimates, as Knox knows he will. He's just got the measure of everybody and everything. And that's the wisdom of a place and being rooted and located. And I just love that. And yes, I'm nostalgic for that, because most places have completely lost it. But what a loss. So we've had yellow wallpaper and barred windows. We've had rocky islands and outcrops with armour, and a very peculiar community in a Scottish fishing village. And we didn't mention the woman with webbed toes. So it's been quite an interesting little journey on the way. So what on earth do we do with that? I'm not really sure where we're going to go with this. So I think your guess is as good as mine.
I mean, I can kick us off, because then I won't have to say anything more intelligent than where I'm starting here. So
it's downhill from here for all of us.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. Or you guys are going to have to raise the bar from here. Let's put it that way. In all three pieces, there is a theme of isolation that's handled so differently. I mean, an isolated tone, but then within that isolated tone, you have this figure of solitude in Ben Knox, who you kind of think at first that he is not connected to the place or to anyone, and is just kind of there. But then you realize he's the most grounded character.
Right. And you think he's mad at the beginning, perhaps.
Right, exactly. Yeah, you just wonder, this really eccentric man off by himself. But, you realize he loves this place. He loves these people. Then you have the isolation in I Am a Rock, which is this chosen isolation, a reaction to painful relationships and experiences. And as we've pointed out, it's not genuine. It's an exploration of how I feel, but without the conviction of I really should stay here and I really believe this is true. And then the tragic forced isolation in the yellow wallpaper. And it's just interesting how that one theme does very different things in each of these masterpieces.
I hadn't thought of that at all. But it's spot on.
Yeah, I'd like to add to that theme in the sense that it's really interesting in how sex or gender falls in this, in the sense that Ben Knox is this eccentric man, but he's kind of beloved and he's allowed to have his life. I just wonder, would they have related to him in the same way if it was a woman in there, some kind of weird, smelly old woman living?
They'd have typecast her as cranky old woman for sure.
Cranky old woman. He's an lovable eccentric. I don't know. And And then with Paul Simon, like, he's an isolated man, but that's kind of his choice, and he's kind of almost reveling in that, wallowing in that. And then with Yellow Wallpaper, we see that she's isolated, but she's not afforded the luxury of choosing that for herself. You know, that's forced upon her. And so often that is the case with women. They don't have the luxury of choosing that. It's, you know, they're so much more subject to the powers that be. Just from a personal standpoint, my grandfather's mother, she was placed in an asylum by her husband at the time, simply because he wanted to start a new life with his new girlfriend.
Oh, wow.
Oh my
And so
goodness.
he took their children, put them in an orphanage. So that was my grandfather was put in an orphanage, put her in an asylum, and then moved on with his life.
That's Henry VIII stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And this happens to women time
Yeah.
and time again.
Yeah,
They
yeah,
don't get the choice. The men have the say, and they get to do that. Yeah, I just think it's an interesting thing seeing how that plays.
I think that's a very fair point.
Yeah.
I'm certainly not disputing it. I wonder whether the key for Ben Knox, though, there's history in the community, and that's what makes him loved and trusted. He's no threat. So if a homeless guy comes into your Kaylee and starts scoffing himself in the kitchen, if they didn't know him, it doesn't matter whether he's a man or woman, they kick him out.
Yeah.
And I'm pretty sure
Right,
that
yeah.
if there was a woman who had been part of the community but lived on her own, you know, on the hill or whatever, but was somehow integrated in the community, again, that would be accepted, because this is all about what you know.
Maybe.
But, you know, the point stands, and it's an important one.
I'd add a layer. I mean, Mac's character is the truly isolated one. You know,
Right.
he has all the trappings of modern life. Several times he mentioned his Porsche 930, you know, kind of thing. You see his conversations, you know, he's trying to get a date the night before he leaves for Scotland. And the woman who he's talking to on the phone through the glass is just like, no, you know,
No
kind of
thanks.
thing. He calls his ex and the conversation goes badly. And you just get the sense that, yeah, he has everything that he thinks everyone should want, but he's entirely alone. And even contrasting that with what Simon says about his song, you know, he chose, you know, this year of isolation, and then kind of writes from that place of realizing you can't live like this. And it's like you watch Mac realizing in the film that this is not the way to live. I have all of these things, but here's a community that's really weird and really quirky. But these people love each other. They enjoy each other's company. There's life happening here that wasn't happening for him in the big city.
Isn't it then really ironic, though, that he sees that value, but they're ready to give it all up for cash?
Yes.
They're ready to disband their whole community because they're like, no, actually, we could just do with the money.
That was a head scratcher for me in watching the film. But then there was this one interesting conversation where one character was saying he's really sad, you know, thinking about it. And the other was like, but you'll be rich, you know, kind of. So I think that was a self-conscious moment.
It's where he's renaming his boat, isn't it? And he says, you know, how many L's are there in dollar?
There's something very human about that, though, in the sense
Yeah.
that we want what we don't have. We always think it's the something else that's going to complete us. So, you know, he wants the community because he has all of the money, and the community wants the money because they're in poverty.
I've never forgotten the feeling at the end of the picture where he's back in his apartment in Houston and he suddenly finds the shells in his coat pocket. And I felt such pain and sadness about that. You know,
Yes.
he's no longer there, and it was heartbreaking somehow. And I think that's what gets to me about this film, because he makes you love this place so much.
Yes, and then that final shot is the empty phone box ringing,
Yes.
and you know it's him ringing.
Yeah.
And that is really poignant.
Sophie, the point you made, just kind of coming from the Yellow Wallpaper to Local Hero in terms of women and their role, and just, you know, we have the Yellow Wallpaper written from the perspective of a woman, and you feel, if you think about it, if that was being written from another perspective, somebody outside the room, it would have been a completely different story. You know,
Completely.
the fact that it's told from her perspective, and you enter her experience and you feel her pain and her trying to rationalize why her life is like this. And no, but my husband loves me. But as you rightly point out, Mark, he knew what he was doing. I mean, mind you, he was in the room with her. So it seems he's somehow convinced of the legitimacy of this quote unquote treatment. But yeah, and then you're right, Sophie. Just it feels like in local here, there's a sort of blindness to the female characters. They're there, but they are like the wallpaper in a certain sense. They're just background. They're a part of the scenery.
It's women written by a man.
Right.
That's what it is. It's from a male perspective, a male gaze, including the swimsuit suit shot with her diving in.
Yes.
Which, doesn't serve much other than them having a pervy conversation in the car later.
Right.
He says he thought, like, Max says he's in love with the hotelier's wife. I'm like,
right.
Have you had more than one conversation with her? We've seen about one sentence exchanged. What is it you think you love about her?
He is drunk, though.
Entirely.
Oh, of course.
Yeah.
But we know that that's ridiculous.
And drinking more.
Yeah, but that we know that that's absurd, and they do too.
Yeah, it felt like in the moment, not so much a longing for her, but just longing for this whole life that he doesn't have.
For the life.
Where,
yeah,
Exactly.
I get that.
He wants to swap with Dennis Lawson. I mean, Dennis Lawson has got to go and do Star Wars, hasn't he? So he's not staying.
Yeah, I was going to say, he's got to go and do Star Wars. He's one of the rebel pilots, isn't he?
And then his nephew's got to be Ewan McGregor one day. So, that's all going to happen. I completely get that. I think, funnily enough, the one female character that does stick in my mind is the woman at the post office who has this deep friendship with the Russian submariner or the fisherman or whatever. And there's something very touching about that. And the fact that they have this sort of routine. And as someone who's as obsessed with the Cold War and that whole era as I am, I've always loved that because it was about being human, trumping the big geopolitical stuff, which is actually, if the film is about the natural world being more important than the quick buck, that little cameo is about human relationships in the end. More precious than the big machinations of the big chess players. I don't know. It's just very touching that felt very real.
That was definitely an interesting. I didn't see that coming at all when he shows up, and I mean, the humor of the female who's piloting the boat with him in, and she's just nattering at him the whole time.
She's terrifying.
And then he gets out, and he's. Yes, she is.
And they're all shouting, "The Russians are coming! The Russians are coming!" It's just epic.
It is epic.
There definitely is a warmth to the film amidst that absurdist humor, just in terms of the relationships. Juxtaposed against their eagerness to just sell and get out of town. You're like, what is going on, guys? There's something here that's worth holding on to.
Yeah, it feels like it's just a very, very kind of quintessential British kind of film in its portrayal. It reminded me a little bit of Waking Ned, the Irish one, just in terms of the small town caricatures. And I don't know, I think having grown up in small village in Wales, that resonates hugely with me.
What's interesting in all three is just you're feeling the power of art to bring subtle critique. And sometimes not so subtle critique, but to talk about something, to discuss something, to present something and get you thinking about it and realize, oh, wow, why was this woman being treated this way? How could this be normalized? And for the sister-in-law to participate in this, so it wasn't just that her husband, who is a medical professional, the sister-in-law was participating and maintaining the status quo.
Is an enabler.
Yeah, and so you feel the power of that critique because it's so well written from the perspective of this woman descending into madness, who's clearly a brilliant and bright and vibrant woman, but here she is being isolated and she's losing touch on reality. And then even in absurdist humor, just that critique of capitalism and the way the world is changing, and that love for the natural environment that came out in the cinematography. Even in 1983, I'm kind of watching and I'm like, wow, look at those special effects. Those are not so special effects right now. But, just the appreciation of the sea and the sky and the shoreline. And just this,
the Northern Lights.
Yes, the Northern Lights. Yeah, this implicit critique of what we value and what we chase, embodied in the characters in this town who are ready to just kind of chuck it all to become millionaires and go God knows where, and then Simon's kind of self-critique of this state of isolation that he's using the art form to say one thing but not mean it. So I find that interesting, just the way art can work that way without feeling preachy at all.
No, it's interesting how art is used in like the yellow wallpapers. In like she's only finding, I think she's only managed to last this long because she has the diary that she's writing in, and then that's certainly true of the author herself, Charlotte Perkins Gilman, that she recovered because she started writing again, being able to express herself in an art form that enabled her to work through what she was experiencing. And I think, similarly with Paul Simon, it seems like this is something he was working through as a person, that he was going through this period of isolation, and he uses his art form in music and lyricism to work through it, and to then be able to talk about it and almost laugh and say, wow, that was a pretty nihilistic time I went through, and like a lot of angst. But, that was very key to him working through it.
Couldn't you say that Mac has to be isolated from his Texas environment to be able to see through it? He has to be outside the fishbowl and realize, oh, there is a different way to live, and maybe that's better. So that's a sort of therapeutic thing. Whereas actually for the unnamed woman in the room, it's not. It's the opposite. It's a very damaging thing. Joel, you said just now that you wanted to speak first because you didn't have anything intelligent to say, but I think you just proved yourself wrong, because that was a very, very good
That's
point.
the better way to do it and prove myself right. So
No,
I'm grateful.
I'm going to ask you both for a last summing up thought before I wrap it up, about our time today.
Well, can I do our time just over this season instead?
Oh yeah, go for it.
It's just has been a fascinating journey. I'm so grateful to you guys for taking a chance on me, and having me just as a part of this. But yeah, it's just been, here's how I've been feeling. There's so many ways in which we can consume art very casually and not very thoughtfully. And I feel so challenged to think more about the things I'm watching, the things I'm reading, not just enjoy them on a surface level, but yeah, to kind of join the conversation, to be thinking about how it's impacting me and affecting me, how it's shaping me as a thinker and as somebody just living in this world and seeking to love others. So yeah, this has benefited me so much.
That's great, Joel. I completely agree. Over to Sophie.
Oh, wow. Guys, it's been amazing these past 8 episodes. And I think, like Joel, I have been encouraged to kind of slow down my consumption of art. I mean, I do consume a huge amount of it, but it has really made me kind of slow down and analyze and think and make connections that I just absolutely wouldn't have. So I've really enjoyed like the privilege of being able to do that. And I've really enjoyed being able to kind of learn new things. Like being introduced to Snarky Puppy is one of the big highlights for me, I have to say. And I've really enjoyed bringing some like female and feminist perspectives to you dudes as well. And you've been trapped in a room with me. Yeah. You've been trapped.
I nearly asked what color your wallpaper was.
Exactly. You've been trapped with me on a podcast, and I've been able to give you female and feminist perspectives, which I've really, really appreciated, and been able to bring those different types of analysis to things. And so it's been a total privilege.
Thank you, Sophie. I chime with everything both of you said. It's been a lot of laughs. And I hope that the sort of 3 or 4 people who are listening to this might agree with all of that as well. And
my mum will.
Well, I was going to come to her. But here we come to the end of season 1. And just thank you to all those who have been listening, wherever you are. I hope you've enjoyed the ride as much as the 3 of us clearly have. And even Owen has almost enjoyed himself. I think there he is in his little producer studio.
Thank you, producer Owen.
Yeah, he doesn't like any of our art, though. He doesn't like any of our art. That's the problem. So, but we like him, so we'll keep him around.
We're working on his discernment, aren't we? So, which brings me to season 2. So we're going to have a break for a few months just to sort of catch our breath and hopefully come back in the autumn with season 2, which I think we are planning it to be bigger, greater, deeper, and therefore better. But the only problem we have is we need to try and figure out what that actually means and looks like. And so we need people's help. We want you, the 3 or 4 who are listening, to help us. So I'm going to create a little survey that will be on links from our social media and also on the show notes. And we just love it if as many people as possible chipped in with comments, with suggestions for, masterpieces or things that we could do to help grow and develop. We'd love it if you chip in, and I'm going to make sure it only takes you sort of 5 minutes or so. And Sophie's mum is very welcome to contribute too. She's been an avid commentator on Instagram, and we love that.
Hi, Sophie's mom.
Yeah, hi, Sophie's mum. Although we do think that your thoughts are slightly biased, but anyway, that's okay. But in the meantime, I hope that everybody has times of happy watching, listening, reading. Keep your ears and eyes open, and you never know where that might take you. So it's goodbye from
Me.
and
me.
and me. Bye.
Bye.
Take care.
Excellent. Woo!
That was Triptych, hosted by me, Mark Minnell, with Joel Bain in Jamaica and Sophie Killingley in the UK, with tech and editorial expertise from Owen Feetham. Visit our website at triptychpod.com, that is triptychpod.com, for episode show notes, background information and various links. Please do get in touch with any questions, comments and even suggestions for future episodes. And if you've enjoyed this, please do share it around and rate us wherever you get your podcasts.